Today we are going to learn how to starch our crochet or knitting patterns, and I'm going to use as an example my crocodile stitch basket pattern that I have available on my Ravelry page. I will make sure to put the link in the description of this video. What we are going to need for materials is our saucepan, cornstarch, tablespoon, measuring spoon, a whisk, a measuring cup, our crochet or knitting project that we want to starch. This one again is my crocodile stitch basket pattern, which does okay to sit up on its own, but I still like to starch it so it's a little less flippy floppy. And also whatever creation you have come up with to block your basket or your other project that you have, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this once we get to that point. And also not pictured is, of course, the water and our stovetop. This method of starching uses cornstarch, which I like to use in part because it is reversible. If you want to take your starching out of your project, you can put it in the wash or even just soak it in water and a little bit of soap and it will come out. We are going to whisk it so that there are no clumps. And it'll look something like that. So once our water comes to a boil, we are going to slowly add our cornstarch and water mixture, and we're going to stir our whisk as we pour to ensure there are no clumps. And you'll see it start to thicken almost instantly. So if it's not still boiling, allow it to come to a boil, stirring constantly, and then remove from heat and let it cool. Now your mixture will start to thicken more as it cools. And we're just going to let it cool to about room temperature, and then we are going to put our knitted or crocheted project in and soak it up. So while that cools, we're just going to talk about blocking our basket or our other projects. First thing to note is that whatever you use to block it will get our cornstarch mixture on it. So if you don't want it to get dirty, I mean, it is washable, but if it's something that you don't want to get dirty, you might want to either use something else or cover it with cellophane, plastic wrap, or tin foil, or anything you have around. So I happen to be using this Pyrex container, and since it wasn't quite tall enough to block my basket on, I just have this bowl that I put my Pyrex container on top of, and then I use the lid for the Pyrex container just to make sure that the base of my basket stays flat. Now if you don't have a lid that happens to be the right size, you can always just cut a circle out of cardboard and use that. And so this is how I'm going to block my basket, all set up, just waiting for the basket to be put on. Now that our mixture is cooled, it's going to look something like this. Nice and thick with no clumps. You might see some bubbles in there, but that's okay. We'll probably end up giving it more bubbles when we put our crochet or knitted project in there. And you just want to make sure that it is cool enough that you can stick your hands in there. Because we'll be using our hands to move around and wring out our project. So I use gloves when putting my project in here, and the only reason is because I simply don't like the feeling of cornstarch on my hands. That's it. So you don't need to use gloves if you don't want to. And so we're just going to take our project and make sure to move it around and squeeze it quite a bit just to make sure that the cornstarch mixture gets through to every fiber of our project. And it's going to soak a lot of it up right away, and we just want to make sure that we squish it and move it around, make sure that it's more or less evenly distributed throughout our project. So when you think you're about done, just take some time to take a look at your project, and if there's any areas like this spot right here that look like they are still dry, just squeeze a little bit in that general area to get the starch mixture moving around. So for this basket pattern in particular, this should have been the right amount of starch and water, but if you are finding that you are having lots of dry spots and you just can't get the starch mixture moving around to them, feel free to just add a little bit more room temperature water to it and just try to evenly distribute it throughout. So now we are going to block our project, and so again, this is for this basket pattern in particular. I'm just going to make sure this is angled correctly. So we just take our basket and simply put it on top, and we want to make sure we have it sitting exactly how we want it to be formed when we are done. Oops. So we want to make sure that the middle of the base of our basket is going to be in the middle of our whatever we have forming our base here. And what I like to do for this pattern in particular is have my base just small enough so that there is space for these bottom scales of our basket, so that they're not going to be touching the counter, hanging below the actual base of our basket. So here we have our basket blocking, and I'm just going around and using my finger to make sure that the scales are all sitting the direction that I want them to. And you might see there might be some fuzzies kind of sticking out, and that's okay because we can go around and just simply cut them off later once it's done blocking. Another thing that we want to do before we leave our project to block for too long is go around and inspect to make sure there are no clumps of cornstarch. Sometimes they can get missed when we are whisking our mixture, so mine looks pretty good here. I just figured I should let you guys know in case there were clumps, because they will show up once it's dry. Okay, so at this point my basket has been drying for about 30 hours, and mine in particular isn't quite dry on the inside, so we are going to take it off of the mold and string it up with a piece of yarn and just let it hang upside down until the inside dries. So I've now removed my basket from my blocking mold, and I'm going to take some yarn or string, or really anything that you can come up with, shoelace even, and I'm going to thread it through probably about a hole around here and a hole around here, and then we're going to hang it upside down to allow the inside to dry while still holding its form. I'm using a yarn needle, but I probably don't have to. Just putting it through the space. And just making it wide so it's got as much support as possible. And we'll hang our basket like this. Since our base is quite dry, I'm not too worried about it losing its shape right now. It's more so the inside of the edges or the crocodile stitch portion that we're worried about right now. So I'm just going to let it sit like that for a while. So this is an example of just how rigid our basket is going to be in the end. It stands up really well on its own, especially when it's got items in it. So as you can see, it's not hard as a rock. It just helps to stand up on its own. If you really want your basket to be really rigid and really hard, I almost doubled the recipe on this one for the cornstarch and water. And I also didn't wring it out as much. I just kind of squeezed it a couple times and almost left a bit of a coating on it actually. And it is quite rigid, quite hard, but I don't know if we'll be able to zoom in here, but the scales look like they've got sort sort of like a glue residue to them. So I didn't really like how that looked. You can kind of see it in the center there. So it's really just personal preference, whatever you're after. I suggest going with, obviously, the recipe that I've done here for the cornstarch mixture, so that our basket still looks nice and still has some rigidity to it. So that's what our basket is going to look like in the end. And that's what our basket looks like right now. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching.